DEWALT came out with a new 14-inch 60-volt professional arborist saw. It is model number DCCS674B, which is $499. And they have DCCS674X2, which is a kit, $749. That $250 is well worth the upgrade, as you're going to get two 9-amp-hour FLEXVOLT batteries, a 6-amp charger, and a small case so you can carry around the batteries, the tools, anything else with you, along with the saw. And if you just buy this bare tool, you're still going to get the same saw, chain, and everything else. It's just the batteries in the charger and the bag that's different. I still think the kit is a good price. Now, I'm going to go over this saw top to bottom, and I need you to, if you skip through this video, back up a little bit if I say something that doesn't make a lot of sense and listen to it. There's a lot to go over with this guy. It is a very, very sweet saw. This thing rips through small branches, through anything that is 4 to 6 inches. This thing just slices through it like no other battery saw that I've been around. It also has a controlled user interface that is also something different that we're not seeing on other saws. And there's some weird things that happen with this while you're cutting. I'll hit on that a little bit later. First, I wanted to test out the biggest claim that DEWALT has on here. They talk about cutting through 11-inch hickory in 11 seconds. So I just wanted to gauge the performance of the saw, and I started out doing so with about an 11-inch piece of maple. That was pretty impressive, so I moved over to some softwood. This is about a 10.5, 11-inch piece of poplar. And while cutting through the poplar, this was my first experience with this user interface that kind of made me go, So you have to push the power button to turn this on. No big deal at all. That's nice. It's a safety feature. If you push and hold, you can turn the power off. So you have no way of this saw running or doing anything if you're climbing trees. I absolutely love that option for safety. Now, if your chain brake is on, that lights up, tells you, hey, chain brake's on, saw's not going to work. Another way of just kind of being safe. And then you also have an orange light here that will light up if you have any type of cutout or low voltage situation or overheating. What I found while cutting the poplar is that this battery meter will actually drop. So if you've watched any other of our videos where we go over voltage while you're using something, this battery meter seems to detect voltage as it drops down, and then when you're done with the cut, it will come back up. Let me just show you that while cutting the poplar. We're at 2 bars. There are a lot of tools that have the battery meter on them, but most of them don't draw the power, or we can't see them while we're really pushing the tool to see that they drop down and come back up. So it's totally normal for this to happen. It's just something that we don't normally see while we're using these tools. And this chainsaw kind of threw me, but I was able to sort of use that as a gauge or a meter as to how much I could push the saw pending where the battery level was, and that really comes into play a little bit later. I kept cutting on this poplar to see how it was going. I did a lot of cuts on the maple. I was just moving around on the larger stuff to really get a feel for this saw. And then I moved up to a really large cut on some oak. This is basically going to be a full cut for this chainsaw. In its oak, it's going to give it a real good go. I thought, let's just go. Battery level at this point is right around 50%, and it still ripped through that oak just like it was close to a full battery, as it should. Now, I kept cutting and decided at some point I'm probably not giving you guys the right picture, so I switched batteries and I wanted to make sure that I was at a full battery, and I started pushing the saw, and I'm cutting faster than anyone probably normally would, especially if you're climbing a tree. I'm not giving the saw a lot of breaks. I want to feel what it's going to be like when you really push it. And I got to a point where it was cutting out on me because I am simply cutting too fast and pushing too hard. This saw has an amazing chain speed and it has a lot of power going to it, but if you want to push a little too hard, you can get this saw to cut out. DEWALT rates this saw to have a peak horsepower of 2.42, and that's with the 9 amp hour battery. The chain speed is 77.4 feet per second. We're using a chain with a gauge of 0.043 and a chain pitch of 0.325. So it's a fairly narrow kerf chain, and our power head weighs 6 pounds without the battery and without the bar and chain and oil. DEWALT rates this saw at 160 cuts per charge with the 9 amp hour FLEXVOLT battery, and that is done on a 4x4 pressure treated lumber. So it's a lot different than if you're going out and just cutting larger pieces of wood. And here with this saw, I am continuing to cut with larger pieces of wood, more or less to test the battery life in a maybe not so real world condition. But if someone was going to go out and just continue to climb a tree, cut it down, move down a little bit, cut it down, and see how many cuts they could get. And with that said, it did pretty well, although I was able to drain the 9 amp hour battery fairly quickly with large cuts. Overall, this saw cut amazing, and the person using this is not going to consistently cut 11-inch plus logs with this all day long. I started going down that road because of DEWALT's stating on the front of 11-inch hickory in 11 seconds. That just kind of put me down that path. This thing is a ripper again through smaller wood, and when you look at it, it's designed, that's what it's meant for. The 14-inch bar on here is perfectly sized for the speed of the chain, the power of the saw, and everything else that it has. If we look at the bottom, this is fully set up to be able to connect to a harness so you can climb, no issue. It is a great place because it's very balanced in that with the 9 amp hour battery. In my opinion, you might want to go up to a 12 amp hour battery if you're going to consistently push this saw. It just seems to make a lot of sense to get that little extra power, and there is a difference between the 9 and the 12 in its voltage output. Plenty of room in here to put that in. When you put the battery in, the saw is not on. That is something that is another, I guess, safety factor. So we can pull the trigger at this point, nothing's going to happen. We again have to push and allow the saw to power up. As we went over before, the mechanical and electric chain brake is on, and the saw will not do anything because it's not going to allow the trigger to turn on electronically, and if it did mechanically, chain isn't going to move. When you do get cutouts, you will get that kind of orange blinking on the caution symbol. That's going to tell you that you have either a thermal event, that's the battery is getting warm, the motor's getting warm, or you just push the saw a little bit too hard. Again, that battery meter that's here is going to move up and down. As you're getting in large lumber and you have a full battery and you're pushing, when you get down to that bottom bar, you can kind of hold it at 1 bar, but if you start to push much beyond that and you hear you're pushing beyond that, you will get a cutout. All this is a rubber overmold up top, which is nice, and it's grippy. Even once you get it covered in sawdust, the gloves seem to work well with it. This is rubber all the way around the handle, which again, nicely built, nicely designed. There is a safety on the trigger. You push this forward and you can pull the trigger. It works excellent. It gets out of the way. It's a little bit larger than many of the other ones, which I think helps it out, especially if you have gloves on. You have your oil adjustment right back here, so we can increase or decrease the oil that's going to the bar. I have not had this saw leak any oil. I think that is absolutely amazing. It does have an Oregon chain comes with it right here. This is our part number. So this Oregon chain, I like that because I can cross-reference that to anything else that I'd like to very easily rather than a DEWALT part number, and it gives me options, and I think as a professional saw it should. Comes with the right file that you should use, and you also have your normal tool. Now this is pretty much a standard chainsaw as you'd look at it on the inside. I'm going to pull this apart. I'm going to loosen the bar just slightly so it goes back together a little easier, and then we can pull this out. Internally here, as you put it together, you'll notice this is the basics, a little bit dirty. But other than that, everything here is as a normal chainsaw would be. You got your oiler up front. Everything here is perfect as far as how it's put together, how things work, and I have zero complaints with how this saw works. If you are looking at this thinking you're going to use it professionally, the cost is up there, and I assume that at that point in time, people are going to start to say, okay, what's everything worth for me to use this up in a tree? But I think that the safety factor, the ability to turn it on and turn it off, and the battery wise of just having something that you don't have to deal with any gas or, and I hate to say it that way because I love my gas saws, but if you're up in a tree, it might be a little bit different if you have to start a saw, if you have something that's not working correctly. It would really suck to climb up in a tree and not have something work. And I guess the only thing that makes me wonder is if you're climbing up in a tree, what are you going to do with that extra battery? Because that would be like your saw not starting, you run out of battery up in a tree, it's not going to be fun to climb back down, so you got to carry an extra battery up with you, which is a little bit extra weight. I guess it would be kind of like climbing a tree in your saw being out of fuel. So at some point you just have to figure that part out. Now, chain did loosen up quite a bit while I was cutting. So about every 2 cuts I was adjusting the chain. I had the oiler just a kicking and it was doing its job, but this chain liked to stretch a little bit, which is what you would expect from a new chain. Now on the bar there is a hole in front, which is something I don't see very often on these saws. These are bearings that go around here, so you can put a little bit of grease in there if you'd like to. That's your thing. That is awesome on a battery saw because we don't see that unless you get into a little bit more expensive saws. You have metal bucking spikes as you would expect, and then our oil level in here, you can see we're right about here. Works great. It's also available to see across the front. Pretty large oil container compared to many others. When I was pulling the saw out of the box, I saw this bag and I initially thought, great, DEWALT has a system set up that you can attach that to your belt and carry it up in a tree so you have an extra battery or a place to exchange batteries when you're there. But this bag is really not meant for that. It is simply set up for 2 batteries and a charger, and maybe throw your file and some tools in it and carry it with you. They didn't really give you anything to attach that battery and carry it up with you if you needed it. It does come with a scabbard. Everything here works as expected, covers things up well. It's a nice, easy traveling saw, lightweight, and this thing rips for what it is. So if you're looking at a saw as an arborist, this thing probably will do everything that you would like it to and be very, very comparable to many of the other gas saws in that horsepower range of about 2.4 that's out there. Cut wise, I think you'll be happy with the 9 amp hour batteries. You have the option obviously to go up to the 12s, and watch that battery meter. If you are cutting something big, it'll actually tell you, how much power you're able or how much you're able to push that saw. I think this is a great saw that most people are really going to like. Price is up there, and it should be, as a professional tool, is what it's meant to be. So very interested in your comments on this. It was a blast testing this guy out. I absolutely love to get my hands on some of this stuff that is a little bit more professional based. It gives you an idea as to what the lesser battery operated saws should or could be like. This is definitely one of those saws that they put the power ahead of runtime. And that's not to say it doesn't have any runtime, but they definitely said, hey, we're gonna put the power to this one. So runtime on larger cuts might suffer with the battery, not life, but runtime. There you go. A lot of runtimes in that sentence. Comments below. Give us a like in this video. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Thank you for your time. Have a great day.